Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of Tribeca New Music's Inview series. I'm Kate Zimmon, and I'm here with composer and instrumentalist David Crowell. We are having David Crowell's new piece, Memories of the Imagined, performed by the Unheard-of Ensemble, March 2nd at the DeMena Music Center, New York City. David, thank you so much for joining us today.
Happy to be here. Looking forward to March 2nd.
Mm-hmm. Well, welcome back, I should say, because I understand this is your second Tribeca New Music interview with us.
Yeah, second interview, and I've been on the festival, I think, 4 times. This will be the fourth time, maybe. So it's been nice to work with the festival and Preston all these years.
Yeah. Well, how has the last year been for you and your music? Any exciting things?
It's been good. Yeah, I spent a long time actually on this piece, so that's been a big part of the year. But also, I have a record coming out on May 3rd on Better Company Records, which I'm excited about. That features sandbox percussion and guitarist friend of mine, Dan Lapel, and actually the cellist in Unheard-of Ensemble is also on this record, Eva Kasian-Lakos. So there's that. Couple recording projects kind of in the near to somewhat distant future that I'm sort of excited about. Some compositional projects also for my duo with Eva, and also working on a piece for a combination of sandbox percussion and Empyrean Atlas, which I'm excited about.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, a few other things in the works.
Yes. Well, I know that the last concert you did it with Tribeca New Music was with Empyrean Atlas, and this time is with Unheard-of Ensemble. So can you give us a quick recap of your relationship with Unheard-of Ensemble, how you guys met?
Unheard-of Ensemble, I met Ford, who's the clarinetist and director and founder of the group, I think, I don't know, quite a while ago now, I guess maybe about 5 years ago. So we kind of mentioned at that time maybe doing something, and then as often happens, things kind of drift away, and then all of a sudden we started applying for grants together and committing again to working on a new piece together. So that's what ended up resulting in this particular piece. So Dan and Mateus I've known for less time than Ford and Eva. I've known about the same amount of time. But anyway, the collaboration's been good. We've been working together since, I guess, probably about October-ish or so. I think we had a rehearsal to kind of start the process, and then we had a preview performance of just part of the piece in December, just to kind of try things out and get our feet wet with the piece, and that was great. And we were recently up in Connecticut actually for a few days, rehearsing pretty intensively. So we've all put a lot of time into the piece, which has been really great, and not something that always happens in these kinds of collaborations. So I'm really excited for this particular piece to be heard at the festival. That's going to be fun.
So they've had direct impact in your composition process with Memories of the Imagined, the Unheard-of Ensemble.
In a sense, yeah. I mean, as a composer, a lot of it is I kind of go away and, come up with these things. And then, it's to write the whole piece basically on my own. But then in the process of rehearsing, I mean, I do actually change a lot of stuff. Some of it minor, and occasionally something more substantial, like adding some parts here and there, rewriting things occasionally, just working on shape and dynamics and phrasing, and all that kind of stuff is something that I tend to not put too much specificity in necessarily as the first step of the process. I like to kind of work with the ensemble and figuring out what kind of shape works both for me as a composer and for the ensemble, what their ideas are for the piece and how they're kind of understanding it. So in that sense, it's very much a collaboration for sure. And then also just the construction of the piece in terms of the electronics, which are a big part of the piece, are all come from original samples from all of the members of the ensemble. So actually, the first step in the piece was recording them doing a number of musical things, and then working with those samples to create kind of the foundation of the piece, which is essentially the electronics. And that way, their sounds and their input were involved, from the very beginning.
Right. So I understand that the structure of the piece is very integral in the theme and also, I guess, your inspiration as well. But can you explain a little bit of how, like you mentioned the electronics in the beginning and how that's eventually layered through to the end, and how that relates maybe to the memories of the Imagined thing? Because I read
Right,
what you said, presses. Yeah.
Yeah. The title is kind of just a reference to the process of having kind of an initial or original experience, whatever that might be. In this case, the experiences are musical. And then how over time we, lose clarity on certain aspects of that experience and remember things selectively sometimes, or which is not necessarily a bad thing, but it is something that happens with human beings and how our memory works. So at several points in the piece, throughout the piece, really, you'll hear this kind of fragmentary experiences, or like even like a full kind of initial musical experience, and then you'll hear what parts of those experiences are chosen from and then developed in particular ways. So that's the basic idea of the piece. And I think I mentioned in the notes that the fourth movement is the final movement is kind of the most clear instance of this, and that the piece starts with this like kind of full sort of musical experience, and then you kind of hear over time how that experience is sort of selectively remembered in various ways. So yeah, that's the explanation for the title and how it works with the content of the piece.
Do you often compose with so much electronic influence in your music, or is this kind of a new foray into the electronic sphere?
I've always done it to some degree. I would say that this and a few other recent pieces are the most that I've ever done. So it's kind of a line of work that I like to follow, along with not using electronics and improvisation. And so it's one of the branches that I find interesting. I would say that this particular piece probably has more electronics than almost any other piece I've written. So it's unique in that way.
Interesting. Yeah. I feel like with a live performance, it's just so much more complicated when you integrate all the electronics and then you have the live performers, and it can be a lot to manage.
Yes. It's much more complicated. In fact, we had a technical audio meeting with Preston and Jake and Fort just to talk about how we were going to do that. One of the challenges of working with electronics and acoustic ensembles is making it feel like it's one experience rather than having the ensemble and then having the electronics. So that's a big part of making it a successful experience is working with the sound, which is something that I do in my life anyway. I'm an engineer and mixer, and I'm really interested in sound audio production and stuff like that. And so it's something that that I'm interested in and comes naturally to me as part of a process with this particular piece. It's like we need to. In a sense, it's like you can't take that part out of it. It's very important to get the balance really good, and that is actually part of the piece. I mean, that's kind of the way I look at it. So my contribution as like a sort of an engineer is also crucial to this particular piece.
Right. I know you started out as primarily an instrumentalist, right? Am I right about that?
Yeah.
Yes. how did you find your way into audio engineering and mixing? Because I know my brother is a audio engineer and mixer as his full-time job. He's not a musician.
Yeah.
But I know it's a very complicated world.
Yeah, it is. It is a complicated world. I mean, I'm mostly self-taught. I just started doing it initially because I wanted to get great recordings of my music. And I've worked with people who mixed my music, back in the day, and I've gotten some very good mixes from people, but I just noticed that no one is ever going to spend the amount of time on mixing your piece that you will. And so, as a composer, it's an extra level of artistic influence that you can have. If you're thinking about the recording as a piece of art alongside the composition itself and the performance of the composition, the recording in and of itself is another expression of my art. So I felt that it was important to learn and understand how to do that well. And so this has been a long process. I mean, I've been doing this for a long time, and I basically learned by kind of experimenting on my own music, and mixing my own music. And eventually I've gotten, much better at it. Now I'm, expanding to work with other people as well, and not just mixing my own stuff. But I do mix all of my own recordings still. I find that to be very important.
I love that because I always think of it as kind of a third party thing, but to have the composer themselves actually mix the music and create a whole nother layer to the piece, the art, that's really cool. And it's like it feels like obvious that you would want to do that, but wow, a lot of work.
Crafting the sound is a big. It's interesting to me. I just really enjoy it. That's kind of the first thing. But I think more and more people are doing it. More and more composers. I mean, many don't, and there are lots of great engineers that will do a great job for you. So I mean, I don't always like engineer my pieces. That's just a step too far for me. I have to be able to like listen and evaluate while like in the studio generally. Although sometimes I have also recorded my own work, but yeah, in terms of mixing and getting down to the sound detail, that's something I like to get into for sure.
Well, since you said this is the most electronic you've ever composed, or at least these newer works that you've been composing are there any new influences you found, like maybe more outside of the classical sphere? I know you already have a lot of outside classical sphere influences, but any new ones in the past year or so?
New influences, electronically, I'm sure there are. I think one of the big influences for this piece is kind of an old influence, actually, which is the electronic artist Fennesz. I think it's how you say it, Fennsz, I believe. But I've been listening to his stuff for decades, honestly. A lot of the ways that he uses granular synthesis and kind of his sound approaches have really affected me over the years. So much so that I didn't even realize it at first until I started working on some of this later music, including this piece. And I was like, and I wouldn't say it sounds like his music, but as a composer, I can see the influence there is pretty profound. So I think that would be the main one I would bring up for the electronics aspect of it.
And in the last interview you had, you said your style was counterpoint. Would you say that is still the case?
I guess so. Yeah, I don't know. Maybe that question caught me by surprise. Yeah, I mean, all my music is contrapuntal for sure, or most of it anyway. Yeah, I don't know. I was talking to some students the other day, or somebody. Yeah, I think it was some students, and I was just talking about the idea of style in general as being kind of an illusion. And I think a lot of people, say like genre defying, or I'm not interested in genre style. But I think there's some truth to that, which is that, we all do have a lot of influences. And, if you're a composer that's interested in different kinds of sounds and different ways of thinking about music, then all of these things will come through in your music. It's actually a very natural experience, a very natural kind of expression, rather than something that's sort of revolutionary in a sense, like genre defying. In a sense, it's a very natural thing. I mean, it could take a while to get there, to get to that kind of thinking, but once you do, it's just sort of a natural mode of expression. So which is a long way of saying, I don't really think I have a style. I think it's just I have all these influences and they come together in particular ways. Certainly, the context that we're talking about this piece is a contemporary classical context for the Tribeca New Music Festival. But, part of Tribeca New Music Festival's mission is thinking about, influences outside of the classical world that are coming in to the classical world. So in that sense, I think this piece and my music in general fits along with that aesthetic.
Right. Well, thank you so much for giving us insight on Memories of the Imagined. I'm excited to hear it. By the way, the trailer is on our Instagram and Facebook if anyone wants to catch a quick glimpse of it. It sounds really beautiful from what I've heard. We're very excited to hear it March 2nd. In the meantime, is there anything you're excited about in your life right now? That can be musical, non-musical, anything going on?
Well, I mentioned like audio production stuff earlier, so I've been doing a lot more of that recently, kind of building up a business there, so I'm excited about that. Life-wise, it seems to revolve mostly around musical things, which maybe I should get a hobby, I don't know, but a few exciting traveling summer, which is, several months away, but I go to Alaska and do some sound work with a friend of mine. We're going to be taking a bunch of recordings and samples and like turning it into some sample packs and stuff. So that'll be fun. I'm going to Croatia and Vienna for sort of like half vacation, half work, recording a piece with an ensemble that I wrote for a couple of years ago. Otherwise I'm just in New York, doing all this music stuff. Yeah.
I know that you tend to go towards more nature or live in nature or retreat towards nature. When did you move to New York and why?
Good question. Especially the why part. No, I'm just kidding. I moved here, I don't know, like maybe 18 years ago. So it's been a long time. I basically moved here because I was inspired by the music scene and just what was possible. And I still am to this day. I think there are many great music cities in the world, I'm sure, but New York is definitely one of them. So there's always potential for new kinds of collaborations. And I mean, my transition from being mostly a jazz musician to working with classical groups on pieces like the one you'll hear is something that happened many years ago as a result of living in New York and having access to all these great musicians and that were interested in playing new pieces. And so there's a very vital scene here. As far as the nature part, I was thinking about this. I'm not sure that nature like affects my music in a particular way. It's I suppose more of just a personal thing that I find inspiring, and I'm sure that finds its way into my music somehow. I couldn't tell you exactly. But yeah, I grew up in Alaska and California, and I try to get out into nature as much as possible. Actually, part of this piece was written at a residency in Maine, very beautiful part of coastal Maine. So I no doubt made its way into this piece as well. in some unexplainable way.
I love Maine. Like in the summer, were you there or?
Yeah, I was there in July. Mid Coast, Maine. Yeah, really, Rockland. Yeah, Rockland, I believe. Yeah,
it's so gorgeous. Not in the winter. I mean, it is pretty in the winter, but not really. It's cold.
yeah, it is cold. I haven't been there, but I imagine.
Well, I don't know if you have Spotify, but do you have Spotify?
I had Spotify a little bit, and I just canceled it. So, and I only had. I'm a little bit anti Spotify, even though a lot of my music's on Spotify, which is just the inevitable truth of our life at the moment, of our musical world. But yeah, so I don't have like a Spotify Wrapped that's full.
It's just easy, it's like a little present, and you know exactly what you did for the year. But I totally get it. Well, what is your alternative to Spotify, since I feel like Spotify is the golden standard nowadays?
Yeah. What's my alternative? I don't know. I like to find like labels, sort of independent labels. And I'll kind of track their releases to some degree, like as well as just honestly just listening to my friends' music, because as I mentioned, and as you know, there are so many great musicians here, so there always are records coming out. But yeah, one of like really creative jazz labels is Pi Recordings. I don't know if you know that one, but a friend of mine, Kate Gentile, just released a record that I listened to recently, a triple record, which is really great. Steve Lehman has a record with it's like a spectral big band record. This is very interesting music. And then New Focus Recordings is a good one for contemporary classical, so I check in on them some pretty regularly. Like actually, I was just recording Dan Lapel, who's the founder of that label, and he was talking about a new Ekmelis record, which is a vocal ensemble. Maybe you know them, contemporary vocal ensemble. So I haven't heard it yet, but now it's on my radar, so I'm gonna go check that out.
Any interesting performances from your colleagues that are coming up in the city? Or outside of the city?
I'm sure that, I mean, there's a lot. There's always a lot. One only needs to go on Instagram and see like many upcoming performances. I noticed my friend Kenny has a couple. Kenny Warren is a really great trumpet player that I play with sometimes. He has a residency at the Owl, I think, and his band Sweet World, which is a trio of trumpet, drums, and cello. So I've seen them a few times live. Highly recommend it. Kenny is amazing, and his band is good. So they're amazing. They're both amazing. Go see that. That's my recommendation.
Well, great. Thank you so much for meeting with me today. Tickets for Memories of the Imagined are on our website, March 2nd at the Domena Center in New York City. Please check it out. David, thank you so much for having this interview. Thank you.
For chatting. All right. See you on the 2nd. Bye.
On the 2nd.